All right, good evening, everybody, and thank you for joining another episode of Capital Conversations. I'm Faya Webb. I am the founder of Leaving a Legacy Investments. My co-host Brianna Chestnut is here. I will also let her introduce herself as well as our guest host, Larissa Green, who will be talking to us tonight about self-directed IRAs. We love to keep this conversational, hence the title. So if you have questions, please feel free to ask or throw them in the chat and we'll ask for you. But we just want to make sure it's as informative as possible and that you guys are getting the information you want and the questions answered that you need. So without further ado, Brianna, you want to introduce yourself?
Yes. Hi, guys. Brianna Chestnut, as Faya mentioned, co-host of Capital Conversations. I can't believe we're on episode 17 already. That is crazy. Time is flying by. I have Soul Investor Co. and we have talked about this on previous Capital Conversation episodes, but as we're learning, we want to bring the info to you guys. And so we are doing that obviously every month. This month, we have the honor of having Larissa Green, and she's going to talk to us about how to use self-directed IRAs for real estate investing. Larissa, I can hand it over to you to give an overview of yourself. I have an overview of the IRA stuff, but I'll let you give an intro of yourself. You can take it away.
Absolutely. Thank you. So I have been in self-directed IRAs for almost 15 years, and I sort of got involved because I worked in real estate, which feels like in another lifetime. And so sort of through my experiences working for Advana, so I'm very fortunate. I get to do things like this where I get to talk to a lot of people in the community of investing, and that really inspired me as well. So I actually do some self-direction myself. I do private money lending, and just getting involved, being a part of education, but also being blessed to go to educational events has really been a big part of what I do at Advanta.
All right, and thank you to the guests that we have online. Hopefully we get a few more in. If not, we are recording, so we'll be just fine and get through this. But Larissa, feel free to kick off your slide deck when you're ready.
Okay, perfect. So as Faya mentioned, if you guys have any questions, I'd love to hear from you. It's a lot of information that we're going to be talking about with self-directed retirement accounts today, but I would encourage you ask any questions that you have because I really feel like it benefits the group. Faya and I met through another webinar that I did. Before that, had you heard of IRAs before, self-directed IRAs?
So I did hear of self-directed IRAs, and it was super timely because I was in a phase where I knew I needed to figure out exactly what they were, how I could use them, and how they would benefit me within the PML arena. So self-directed IRAs and solo 401ks are the two things that I wanted to kind of look at and go over and understand how I can use those to my benefit in the business.
Yeah, awesome. How about you, Brianna?
Yes, when I quit my job 5 years ago, I'm in a new position. But anyways, when I quit one of my careers, I transferred my 401k to a self-directed IRA, and I used some of the funds that way. So, but I'm always learning, and I'm open to new ways because I do not know everything. That is for sure. And there's always something new to learn, even if you know a topic. You think you know a topic, right?
That's right. That's right. There's so much to learn, and that's why I mentioned it's a lot of information that we talk about when we talk about self-directed IRAs, and two topics right off the bat, right? That you mentioned, Faya, private money lending, and then solo 401ks. I actually did a webinar today on solo 401ks for a group, and I talked about private money lending on one of our webinars a couple weeks ago. So there's a lot of information that we can provide, but there's also a lot of education behind it as well. So here's my contact information, and if anybody has a specific situation they want to reach out to me about, but I'm also going to give the slides to Faya so that if anybody wants them as the handout, they're welcome to them. Just keep in mind that as we go through the information today, we're really talking about education. We don't provide tax, legal, or investment advice. And so if you have a question about investments or structures or something that you're looking at or experiencing, please feel free to reach out to me. But if it's something I can't answer, I will let you know. And then those are the times you're going to reach out to your professionals like your accountant and your attorney. Just a little bit about my company. I mentioned my background with the company, almost 15 years years now. We've been in business over 20. We have 4 billion in assets under administration. All of our clients have a dedicated account manager. And so a lot of times when people come over to us and they want to do something with their IRA account, invest in things outside of the market, they're new to it. That's very typical. And so having somebody who's going to be there to answer your questions and help you through that process is really important. So now with that stuff out of the way, we're going to talk about takeaway points. Because again, it's going to be a lot of information. And if you haven't heard it before, you're going to see that there are things to know. There are rules involved. But the real key takeaway points are any IRA or former employer plan qualifies. And so we heard that already from Brianna, that she moved over an old employer's plan to self-direct. So once you've severed ties with an employer, you can move those funds. If you're still currently employed, I would encourage you to just check with the employer's plan, because we are seeing more and more that there's going to be some availability, maybe to some extent within the plan, not always, but maybe that you could move some of those funds. You choose the investment. So when we talk about a self-directed retirement account, we're truly talking about self-directing. So choosing the investment structure, a lot of times determining the rate at which your IRA is going to grow and making those investments through the retirement account. And then all expenses are paid by the retirement account and any income is received by the retirement account. So those are really my big points as we go through this presentation. So what is a self-directed IRA? And, I know a lot of times people will tell me, well, I have a self-directed IRA. It's with a brokerage account. I get to choose the investments I'm making. But really, that is a different type of self-directed IRA. We're talking about investments outside of the market. Typical self-directed IRA custodians don't have anything to sell you. They're simply going to hold the account. You're going to find the investment. We're going to help you get it done in the name of the retirement account so that it is tax deferred or tax free, depending on the type of account. And so it's under a specific vesting, demonstrating that is an actual investment of the IRA. And so that's what we're talking about when we say self-directed. There are so many different things you can invest in through a retirement account. Have you guys ever heard of anything really, truly unique in a self-directed IRA?
I haven't. My knowledge of the concept is pretty much a summation of what you mentioned, like moving it from a previous employer because they won't let you do. I checked for my TSP and they won't let you do it while you're still there. So
Right.
just moving the funds over so that you have accessibility to it, but just to use for anything, PML, syndication deals, any
Yep.
kind of real estate investments that you're trying to get into.
Yeah, that's right. And real estate tends to be the number one asset class that we see in all different structures. So you named a lot of the structures that we see in real estate. And it can be a first mortgage, a second mortgage. It could be a real estate option, for example, but it goes beyond that. We see people invest in movie projects and we see people invest in things like wineries and breweries. And I've had people invest in sports teams before. And so there's a lot of really unique investments. And actually, usually once or twice a year, we do a webinar on the unique side of self-direction. But my point in describing those assets to you is just to really show you guys that you're really taking control of that retirement account and investing it in maybe what you know best. So again, real estate, those are the most common assets that we see, but there's other investments out there and people come to us to make those investments because those are the investments that they understand and they want to see their retirement account grow with those investments. And, the other opportunity there, of course, is diversification. So having that ability to truly diversify your portfolio. So taking a portion of what it is that you want to self-direct, making the investment you want, you can move over just what you need for that specific investment. And because IRAs can transfer between each other as often and whenever you like, you can do that again if you find another deal at a later date. So I think that really makes it something unique, but also gives you a lot of opportunity in those accounts. And just on my slide here, you can see only 4% of retirement accounts are self-directed. It is going up. And, there's a lot of, you see a lot of stuff in the news from time to time on self-directed IRAs. And I think that's really just getting the word out there, which I think is really cool. So we kind of talked about the asset classes and I have them listed here again, but you're going to see as we go through the slides, the IRS doesn't have a list of things that you can do. Instead, what they've provided is a very short list of things you can't do and people you can't transact with. And I think that's going to be really important because you're going to see the asset classes you can't invest in. a lot of times I don't even get asked about those anyways, but it's going to be the people that you can't transact with that are going to be important here. Typically, when you're making investments for investment purposes, it's going to be something that you can do, but you definitely should be aware of the rules. So what can be self-directed? Well, anything that ends in IRA. And I also have up here plans for businesses. And those are typically going to be small businesses, so self-employed individuals as sole proprietors and independent business owners, maybe spouses as employees or equitable partners in the business. And we do help with SEP IRAs and simple IRAs. So those two plans can also allow for employees. So if you know, are self-employed and then maybe you have an assistant or someone like that, where, you know, they're not just a partner in the business, you can still have an employer-based plan, but just being aware of the rules and choosing the plan that makes the most sense for your business. I also have up here savings accounts, and the health savings account and education savings account. The rules for self-directing those are going to be exactly the same as IRA accounts, and so we can help with those as well. A lot of times people will ask me about, you know, making annual contributions versus having the earnings that they're going to have for a specific investment. So they might say, hey, I know the contribution for a Roth IRA this year is $7,500, for example, for 2026. And I'd like to make that annual contribution, but I also have an investment coming up. And the earnings are going to then exceed the amount I can contribute in a year. But the great news is earnings and contributions are completely separate. And so contributions is going to be based on the annual limit the IRS provides us each year. And that's a personal contribution money you're taking out of your personal bank account and contributing to the account based on your earned income, your personal earned income. But then earnings within the IRA are going to be unlimited, which is really cool. So when we talk about self-directed IRAs, I mentioned there's two investments or asset classes you can't invest in, and then there's people you can't transact with. And I think, you know, like I said, the two asset classes are just going to be life insurance and collectibles. And I don't know if anybody on this call is already familiar with that, but you can imagine I don't get many questions about that. Typically, people don't come to me and say, hey, I want to invest in a piece of art. I'm not saying that in 15 years it hasn't happened, but it's very rare that somebody asks me about those asset classes. It's more likely that people will say, I want to lend money to my son or to my daughter, or can I lend money to my mom? And these all would be prohibited transactions. And the IRS basically says people up and down your lineal tree. So, and that includes yourself, your spouse, your parents, your grandparents, your children, your grandchildren, and then any spouses or business entities of those. So if you said, well, if I can't lend money to my son, can I lend it to my son's business? And that would be prohibited. So you can see again, up and down that lineal tree, and then related entities and of course spouses are going to be prohibited. And so when you think about something that like that, a lot of people say to me, well, there's a lot you can't do, but outside of that, the sky is just about the limit. So there's a lot you can do. And typically when you're going to, let's say I was going to lend money to my son, is that an investment for investment purposes? Probably not. So you're looking for those arm's length transactions. So I might lend money to Fire for a real estate project that she has going on, for example. And, you know, because this isn't, you know, up and down my lineal tree, then I can make that investment. And when you think about that, it makes a lot of sense because, you know, I might say to my son, well, I'll lend you that money. And then if he couldn't pay it back, you know, now it becomes an issue. And so I don't know if that's really, you know, the purpose behind the IRS rules, but when I think about it in that way, it makes a lot of sense to me. And then again, the business entities. So just because you have an LLC, it's not getting around the rules, for example. So you can't lend money to your personally owned LLC or to your son's LLC, for example. That's still prohibited. And so you just want to be aware of these things. But again, typically people are coming to us because they are making third-party investments. They are doing third-party transactions where they're like, hey, you know, they're raising capital. I want to put my IRA funds into that because it's, you know, going to buy a multifamily project or rehab a multifamily project or a mobile home park or something like that. So we see a lot of that, storage units, you know, things of that nature. And then on the third box here, you're going to see unrelated business income tax. And unrelated business income tax does not make an investment prohibited, but there are two times when an IRA is exposed to a tax. And I know that sounds strange, because you're saying, well, this is a tax deferred, of course, like a traditional IRA or a tax-free account. But this does come into play. And it's either if you have business income being returned to your IRA. So what is typically what's being returned to your IRA. It's passive income, right? So interest income, dividends, or rental income, for example, typically passive. So it's not typically business income. But if you're invested into a business and you do have business income being returned to the IRA, that is going to trigger unrelated business income tax, or sometimes people will just simply call it UBIT. The other time is that if your IRA finances to purchase real estate. And I know that it comes as a surprise a lot of times to people that you can do that, but you can. It does trigger UBIT in that case. So if I bought 123 Main Street, for example, and I used a loan, it has to be non-recourse. So there's some specific language in there, non-recourse. And it does expose the IRA to this tax. And the tax in this case is related to the amount of debt. So if I borrowed 50%, then 50% of the income being returned to the IRA is going to be exposed to the tax. I'm not going to say too much more about that. Typically, people are either buying with cash or they're partnering for cash. But another time that you could be exposed to that, of course, would be in a syndication or a limited partnership if they're using financing to purchase their real estate. So just be aware of that.
So here's how I deciphered all of that. I will be calling Larissa to make sure I am not jacking this up royally. That's
So
my summation of that whole thing right there.
So we do have a webinar on unrelated business income tax, and we update that probably once a year, I would say. And typically, I can't make a 100% determination on things like syndications and limited partnerships and if this applies. So typically what I'll do is I'll tell you, hey, here's more information, talk to them about it, and also talk to your accountant, because I think sometimes people hear that there's a tax and they worry about it, but I think having more information might be very helpful, because the IRA could get deductions in that case and to offset that tax. And again, the tax is on the income related to the debt, not the principal amount invested. So, just keeping that in mind. But again, a lot of times you're making investments, for example, when you're lending money, so being the private money lender, where this would not trigger any tax in the IRA. So that's more typical. So again, self-directed IRA rules. I just like this chart because it really shows you the people up and down your lineal tree here. Do you guys see anybody who is left out of this chart? That's sort of kind of an interesting concept there.
Let's see.
So it's brothers, sisters, aunts, uncles, and cousins. So out the sides there, you don't have a prohibited transaction. So they're not disqualified, or I like to say they're not expressly disqualified. So, if you were going to deal with brothers, sisters, aunts, uncles, cousins, it should be at an arm's length type of basis. So investments for investment purposes, for example, just making sure you're doing things at fair market value, things of that nature. So I think it's very interesting the way the IRS rules work. And so just a good example of how you can work within the rules and make the investments that you want to make. Again, just having knowledge of the rules. And again, it's a lot of information. So I always encourage people, like Saya said, just reach out to us. The idea behind this education is for you to have an understanding, a basic understanding of how self-directed IRA work and self-directed IRAs work. But when you have an idea for an investment, you can always reach out to us and say, hey, you mentioned something, let's talk about that. So I like this slide because it really just kind of lays it out there for you. No selling, exchanging, leasing property to yourself or disqualified persons, lending money, extending credit, which, we talked about the non-recourse loan. So you can't extend your personal credit for your IRA. It has to be non-recourse. No furnishing goods, services, or facilities. And so I couldn't buy an office complex for my personal business, for example, in my IRA. That would be prohibited. Even if I was going to plan on paying fair market value rent, that would still be a problem because I'm a disqualified person. So keeping that in mind. No self-dealing, no personal use, so no second home or vacation home or anything like that. Just a part of the rules, you do have to have a custodian or a trustee, basically between you and your IRA account. The exception to that is a solo 401k. A solo 401k, you can actually have checkbook control. You need a plan. So you need a 401k plan in place. And then once that plan is in place, as long as the plan document allows it, you can have checkbook control through a bank account in the name of the 401k. And you act as trustee, custodian of that, and the administrator of the plan. And you can do everything through a bank account in the name of the 401k. But the IRA is different. You can't borrow from an IRA, but you can borrow from your 401k as long, again, as your plan allows it. You can't pledge your IRA's collateral. That's very important. And we kind of went over some of this stuff, but non-recourse loans. You can take a distribution from your IRA, but you have 60 days to put that money back. So that's an indirect rollover. And you can only do one of those in a 12-month period. So if you did take a distribution, you needed that money for just a couple of weeks, let's say, as long as you rolled it back in to an IRA within 60 days, then you have that opportunity to consider it an indirect rollover. And then depending on state law, you may have creditor protection. And sometimes people will say, Larissa, what about this state? What about that state? I'm sorry, I don't know them all, but I'm sure we could, find a way to look it up too.
I have a question.
Yeah.
So you mentioned the solo 401ks and the self-directed IRAs. And I know a lot of it happens when you're like rolling over an existing 401k from a job, or if you're starting a business. But if somebody's working and they want to start one, can they do that? And how?
So can you start a solo 401k or an IRA or either?
Correct. Or yes.
Okay. So an IRA, you have to have earned income in order to make contributions. You mentioned rolling over from an old employer plan. We would just match the type of IRA that goes along with the plan that you're rolling over. So if you were going to roll over, say, a pre-tax 401k, then you would roll it over to a traditional IRA. And you're not obligated to make contributions to a traditional IRA. You could simply set it up, roll over the funds, and that gives you the opportunity to take control of that account. You can make contributions to a traditional IRA or Roth IRA or any of those, and you can simply start it with a contribution as long as you have earned income. So that's that specific designation on the income being earned is important, but then you can make your contributions to that account. And then each of these accounts has an annual contribution limit. Roth and traditional IRAs are $7,500 this year, or $8,600 if you're over the age of 50. The solo 401k, even if you have a W-2, so I'll use myself as an example, with a W-2, if I had self-employment income, I could still have a solo 401k. And if you have an employer plan through your W-2, then this is where you want to get your accountant involved and say, hey, I have this employer plan. This is what I'm contributing through that plan. I also have self-employment income. Can you help me calculate what I would be able to contribute into the solo 401k? Now, if you don't have an employer plan at work and you do also have self-employment income, then you don't have to, you can just use calculations based on what your self-employment income is. But if you have two plans, one through your W-2 and one through self-employment, then there's going to be a formula of how much you can contribute. But that's a great question. You can do that as long as you have self-employment income, and the understanding is sort of that you have the income and plan on making contributions. But if you are eligible for the solo 401k, then you can also roll in any old employer plan as long as the plan allows. So sometimes when we talk about solo 401ks and we talk about all their benefits, it's going to be really important to make sure that the plan you set up allows things like rollovers from old plans. Any other questions on that?
I'm good. Anybody else? No?
Okay. So I have this really easy example of undeveloped land to start with our case studies here. And I like this case study because I want to emphasize that, this, sort of like land speculation. So they're buying a property and it's not going to have any income, because sometimes people will say that to me, well, what if I buy a lot? It has no income coming in. Doesn't the IRS expect income? And you can buy undeveloped land. You can make that investment. If you think about something, that is a buy and hold or an investment you're making that might not have earnings for several years, and that's permitted. So something like a lot somewhere would be permitted. Just making sure that the process is in place to make the investment, hold it in the IRA. And then, of course, there's going to be expenses involved. In this case study, you're going to see that. So you just want to make sure that the IRA can pay those expenses. So remember, my takeaway point 3 was the IRA pays all of the expenses and it receives all of the income. So Susan wants to use her $50,000 rollover IRA to purchase a $40,000 piece of undeveloped land. And so she opens and funds an IRA account. She finds the investment, and then she makes an offer to purchase. Now we're going to talk about that offer, because you want to make the offer in the name of the retirement account. And so you'll get that account set up. It does have a specific vesting, which you'll see on my next slide. And then the investment is actually made through the retirement account. So when she makes the offer to purchase, she's going to sign it as read and approved. And then Advanta IRA is actually the legal signer of her IRA. So if you've signed a contract before, you're going to read it. In this case, you're going to read it and sign it as approved. And then the custodian is going to sign it on your behalf and submit it based on whatever information you get. So, of course, this is going to be state dependent, but like in Florida, we can use title companies or closing attorneys. And so you would provide that information to the custodian so that they know where that contract is to go. If there's an agent involved, whatever it might be, you're going to provide that information so that we can help you along that journey to make that investment. So once that's done, and the offer gets accepted, the contract is signed by all parties, including Advanta IRA for benefit of. And then once we have all the information we need, including the closing date, then Advanta IRA will fund that directly from the IRA. So that's important. Remember, on the rules, we talked about how you have to have a custodian between yourself and your IRA. So that means first, you're going to set up an IRA account. Your custodian is going to receive either your rollover, your transfer, your annual contribution, whatever it is. It's going to go to the custodian. And then you're going to make this request and fill out some forms that say, hey, this is the investment I'm making. And then the custodian is going to send those funds to fund the investment for you. And it's going to be under specific titling so that it demonstrates to the IRS that this is an investment of the IRA. So you can see on the second box, purchase documents, that specific titling is there. So Advanta Trust Company, Inc. for benefit of Susan Smith, IRA number 12345. And Susan can choose to leave her name off of there and just use her account number if she'd like. But ultimately, it's going to be identified as her IRA account rather than herself personally. And so I always say you kind of want to think of your IRA as your business partner, because your business partner is going to pay all of the expenses. That includes closing costs. And then it's going to receive all of your income. So remember that sort of arm's length transaction idea for the investment that you're making. So now in her structure, her investment strategy, remember that this was undeveloped land. So she's just going to hold it until somebody comes along and wants to, buy the land and develop it. And so since she doesn't have income, she's going to have some expenses, right? So what are those expenses when you have undeveloped land? You're typically going to have insurance, right? Real estate taxes. If it's truly undeveloped, but doesn't have, maybe it's not a forest, but maybe it needs to be mowed or something like that once a year for some reason or another. So thinking of those expenses ahead of time. Now, if the expenses are fairly low and she can just make an annual contribution each year to cover them, well, then that's great. But if she says, well, they're going to be a little higher maybe the first year or whatever it is, then she wants to plan for that and maybe transfer over a little more than she needed for the purchase to cover those expenses. So let me just go back to the previous slide. You're going to see that she had $50,000 she moved over to buy $40,000 worth of land. So she leaves that extra $10,000 in the account in case she has expenses over and above, maybe whatever her annual contribution is, or maybe she already made her annual contribution that year. So that's important just to, recognize in case you are going to have those expenses. And then it's up to Susan how long she holds this property. So ultimately, if she's like, hey, I'm going to hold it for 10 years, but then somebody comes along and wants to buy it in 3 or 5 or, 6 months, that's up to her what she wants to do with it because it is a self-directed account. So just here's some examples of what we've seen for undeveloped land. So we've seen clients grow timber. They've rented them to farmers and vineyards. They've had people come along who purchase them for storage units and mobile home parks, and then other resources as well, like mineral rights. So there's a lot of unique opportunity out there for things. I kind of like this example because it really kind of shows the different strategies you can use for something as simple as maybe buying a lot or buying some undeveloped land. Does anybody have any questions on that for me?
I have a question that's not directly on that. But what I did think about is I have an old 401k plan from when I was contracting that's just like sitting with American funds. And I currently have a TSP as a federal government employee. Would I be able to roll the old 401k money into the self-directed IRA?
Yeah,
Okay.
absolutely. And yep, once you've severed ties with an employer,
Yep.
you have the right to roll it.
Perfect.
Yep. So now I want to talk about partnering on real estate. And I like this example because it just shows you how you can partner accounts together. So we did talk about, borrowing to invest in real estate, and I do see that occasionally. But it's more likely, or something that I see more often, is that people partner retirement accounts, and they might partner with a spouse. So I use this example because, think back to the rules where I talked about who's a disqualified person, and your spouse was considered disqualified, but you're disqualified from transacting with your spouse or having a current benefit with an IRA from either spouse's IRA. However, partnering, as you're going to see, is going to be permitted. And so it's always about the structure when you're making these investments. So more typically, I see partnering. I do see spouses partnering, but I also see individuals partner their own accounts. So, for example, partnering a Roth IRA with maybe a health savings account, because the health savings account sometimes starts with a lower balance. And so they're like, how am I going to get this money to work, in the investment structures that I want? And so they might partner their Roth IRA with their HSA, for example. And so partnering among disqualified persons is fine as long as the investment is made together at the outset and they're listed as tenants in common on the deed. So, or in this case, the deed, but on the investment. So it could be an LLC, it could be private money lending, it could be buying real estate. There's lots of different structures for that. But ultimately, the percentage of ownership is going to be related directly to the amount of funds brought to the table for the investment from each party. So whether that's Linda and Paul's IRA, or Linda and Linda's IRA, or Linda and her mom's IRA, these partnerships, even though these are disqualified persons, are going to be okay as long as it's done at the outset. So the real estate is new to Linda and new to Paul. They're not buying it from each other. They don't already own it personally, and they're not buying it from a disqualified person, essentially.
Are you saying that you can pull money from a HSA?
Yes, an HSA can be held in a self-directed account as well. So you can transfer, set up an HSA and transfer from the HSA to an HSA with us in order to self-direct.
Okay, nice.
Yeah. So in my example here, like I said, I use Linda and Paul as spouses just to really clearly demonstrate how, hey, these are disqualified persons, but you can still partner. And that goes, like I said, for any of Linda's accounts altogether, or even Linda personally. So Linda and Paul are going to partner IRA funds. They each have $100,000 in this example. They find a property for $150,000, and they determine it needs $20,000 worth of repairs. I think this is another great example too, because as the self-directed account holder, they're making all the decisions for these accounts. I always joke that you don't want me negotiating on the price of a house because you'll pay more than it was listed for. So, you just want to keep in mind that Paul and Linda are going to do all the negotiating. They're going to make all the decisions on that property. So they say that it's, okay, we're going to need 20,000. It's better for us to partner because that gives us, not only more funds, maybe buy a more expensive property, but also the opportunity to fix it up the way we want it before we rent it out. So in this case, Paul and Linda are going to each open an IRA account. And that's very important because sometimes spouses say to me, oh, well, I'm sure our account under the custodian now is joint, but IRAs are individual retirement arrangements. So those are for individuals. So you might have your spouse listed as your beneficiary a lot of times is what you'll see, but the account itself is for an individual. So we're going to set it up the same. Paul and Linda are each going to have an IRA. We're going to help them transfer funds. And then we're also going to have them read and approve the contract, and then we'll sign on behalf of each of their IRAs. And then they're going to tell us, who they're working with. This is the agent, this is the closing attorney or title agent that we need to be in touch with in order to make this closing happen. These are the dates we want funding by. And so we're working very closely with Paul and Linda, but ultimately, as a custodian, we're handling the documents and we're funding those investments. So once we have everything read and approved, we're going to wire it out to the closing company, a title company, I'm sorry. And then we are going to, the title would be, and this is a perfect example. Now, remember, the percentage of ownership is going to be directly related to the amount of funds from each account. And so I just made this really simple 50% undivided interest because they're each going to bring $75,000 for the purchase and another $10,000 for the repairs. but it's going to be directly related to the amount funded from each account. So if, Paul had 20%, let's say, and Linda had 80%, then that's just how it's going to work out because of the prohibited transactions and disqualified persons rules. You can't say, well, just because Paul only has 20%, but I want him to get 50% of the earnings, so I want to divide it that way. That just won't work. It has to be this undivided interest or pro rata. So there's the title for you, Advanta Trust Company, Inc. for benefit of Paul's IRA number 1234 as to a 50% undivided interest, and the same for Linda as to a 50% undivided interest. And that's actually how the deed is going to read. Now, again, you can leave your names off if you want to just use account numbers, but it would be pretty typical that we would just leave the names on unless the clients ask and say, hey, I'd rather just use my account number. The IRAs are going to share in the income and the expenses. And so, Paul and Linda will sign on to their Advanta portal and they'll say, hey, there's this expense for $5,000 for 123 Main Street. And then Advanta's going to get that request. We're going to see its own 50-50. We're going to pull funds from each account and then pay that expense for them. And when income is received, it's going to be something that we receive either by check or ACH typically. We're going to see that, again, that property is owned 50-50, and we're going to divide the share of the rent to each of them. Any tax bills, any insurance bills, anything like that will be divided along those lines for the life of the investment. Something to know is that Paul and Linda can't buy each other out because now remember, they are disqualified persons. And so their IRAs are disqualified from doing any transactions among each other. And so if Paul said, hey, Linda really wanted to, liquidate her IRA in retirement, we were going to go on a big fancy vacation or something like that, so I want to buy her IRA out of that property. Unfortunately, that won't work because they're disqualified persons. Now, if they were undisqualified or non-disqualified persons, then yes, that could happen. But in this case, it would be prohibited. So new investment, new to you, new to the IRAs, and the investment percentage of ownership is going to remain the same for the life of the investment. But of course, Paul and Linda, if they were short on funds, they could get a non-recourse loan, so they could finance the property and pull money out of the property equity. For example, they could make IRA contributions. They can always transfer from IRAs. So there's still ways to get money into the account if they needed more money without, liquidating, but just something to keep in mind. Any questions? No? Okay. So this is my last case study, but again, private money lending, that's something that I have some experience with, and I think it's a really cool way to grow your retirement accounts. And there's lots of different ways to do private money lending. So, there's things that we see like wrap loans, for example, and we see earnest money deposits, and we see joint ventures, and we see all kinds of private money lending. So I'm going to use the joint venture agreement example because I think it's really cool. But something that I think is really cool too about private money lending is that you get to determine the rate at which your IRA is going to grow by determining the interest rate you're willing to lend money at, right? So in this example, Andrea has $100,000 in an IRA and she wants to invest in real estate, but she doesn't have time or the inclination to be super involved in the investment. She would rather lend money to somebody who is going to, be out there in the field and doing all the work, where she can say, okay, hey, we're going to work together on this, but Steve maybe has the knowledge and the experience to do the actual work on that project. And so she says, okay, well, I'm willing to lend this money. Now, keep in mind that, we don't do any due diligence for you. So you want to feel comfortable with the deal and the person you're dealing with. And so she's going to do diligence on Steve and the property she's looking to flip. And they agree upon terms of the loan. And Andrea is going to determine everything. So we like to say you be the bank with your IRA. So she's going to determine the amount she's willing to lend. What is the interest rate? How long is she willing to lend it? Is it amortized or maybe interest only? Over how many years if it's amortized? Is there any equity participation, or is this straight interest? Who's going to pay the lender's fees? So what about Advanta IRA's fees? So if you're lending money out and your borrower is really, initiating that loan, are you going to ask the borrower to pay your Advanta fees? Are you charging late fees? Do you have points involved? There's all of this stuff to private money lending, and you get to determine all of that. So the loan amount is $100,000 at 5%. but there's equity participation here. So a third of the profits will go back to Andrea's IRA at the end. And so there's going to be a monthly payment in this case. Again, that's determined by the IRA holder. And then Andrea's attorney is going to prepare the note and mortgage, and she's going to read and approve all of the documents. And then she's going to also let us know, okay, hey, this is going through the attorney, or maybe this is going through a title company, and we're going to work with those individuals as well. And then once she gives us her permission, we're going to make the investment for her, and payments will go back to her IRA. When Steve's ready to pay that back, he's going to let her know. She's going to provide the payoff letter, and then ultimately funds go back to the IRA account, and Andrea is ready to make her next investment. So in this example, the repaid principal was $100,000 with $2,500 in monthly payments. Her share of the profits was $10,000, so her total earnings are there. And I like to show Steve's side too, because I actually just talked yesterday for a group about raising capital with IRA funds. And so if you're involved in a lot of projects, knowing about self-directed IRAs can be a great tool in your tool belt, because you might go to somebody and say, hey, we did this deal together last year. I have another deal coming up. Do you have money to lend? And that person might say, hey, I don't have the cash available right now. Maybe it's invested somewhere else. But if you said, hey, did you know that you can use an old 401k, an IRA to do this investment, that may give you the opportunity for a new partnership because of that. And so it's basically a new pot of money that people can access to make those investments. And so when you're looking at something like that, if you're a rehabber, for example, or maybe a buy and hold investor, knowing about self-directed IRAs can be a great way to start a conversation about a new private money lender for your projects. So here's my takeaway points again, guys, because I know, again, it's a lot of information to share. We went over a lot of different strategies as well. So just remember, any IRA or former employer plan qualifies. You choose the investments, and then all expenses are paid by the IRA, and any income is received by the IRA. And if you're kind of going, hey, Larissa, there was that exception where, Paul and Linda partnered and then their IRAs were both responsible, you're correct. So that is going to depend on the percentage of ownership of the IRA. And so if you're partnering IRAs with non-IRA funds, for example, there's going to be exceptions there. But just keeping in mind, when your IRA is 100% owner of an investment, that is going to apply. Here's my contact information again, and I will make my slides available also so that I can share them with anybody who wants them. Is there any questions?
I have a question.
Yeah.
So I kind of look at this as like using our retirement funds to make investments and grow money, right? And you're like helping do that and transact all that. Now, say we've got a lot of ROI and we're ready to like use that money to go do something for ourselves. Maybe, I don't know, purchase a house or whatever personal thing that we want to do. How can you take it out, and at what point can you take it out to use it for things that you would like?
Yep, 59 and a half is IRS retirement age. So it's kind of an awkward age, but 59 and a half is the way they say it. And so you can take distributions of your traditional IRA once you reach that age, and they're going to be tax deferred. So when you take distributions, that means you're going to pay tax on the amount you distribute the year you distribute it. If you have a Roth IRA, two things have to be true for distributions to be completely tax-free. One, you've reached age 59 and a half, and two, the account has aged for at least 5 years. So as long as you've had a Roth IRA in existence for a minimum of 5 years, then you have that 5-year aging, and 59 and a half now means that the account is completely tax-free.
Terry said, what is the maximum contribution that you can contribute to a solo 401k?
Solo 401k is going to depend a little bit on your age and the year. So if you're contributing for 2025, it's different than 2026, but 2026 is 72,000. And then if you're 50 to 59, you get an additional catch-up contribution. And I can't remember that number right off the top of my head, but then 60 to 63 is what they call a super catch-up contribution. So you get a little more, and then 64 plus reverts back to the same initial catch-up contribution. So 72,000 and above. But that 72,000 is based on a formula of your income. So just be aware of that. So it's 24,500 for 2026 as your own employee, as the employee, And then you as your own employer get another 20 to 25% as the employer contribution. And so the maximum amount is those two numbers combined, not to exceed 72,000.
Okay, so going back to the 59 and a half, when people are ready to take it out, you're getting, what are they called? Distributions? Is that what they're called?
Yeah, distributions. Yep.
Every month?
So you can set it up how you want. So if you say, okay, well, maybe you want to go to Hawaii, next month, and you say, well, I'm going to take out, $15,000 in distributions from my plan so that I can go to Hawaii. Or you can take it out every month if you want to. If that's going to be ordinary income to you, regular income to you, then you can set it up that way. Once you reach age 73, so they bumped it up a little, and I think there's plans to bump it up again, or I think it's already in the works to bump it up again. I can't remember, but right now it's age 73. You have to start taking distributions from pre-tax accounts. So that's called a required minimum distribution. But up until that age, you can either continue to grow it. So you can leave it in that account, continue to grow it. You can take partial distributions. You can take a little bit at a time. You can take a little bit monthly. You can take a lump sum every year. You have a lot of flexibility there because of the way the accounts are structured.
So what if let's say I start taking distributions at age 74 and I pass away and I have 1.2 million in there. Like, I assume I have a beneficiary noted in the, okay. So then all of that then gets passed down to the beneficiary.
Yes. So when you establish an account, you're going to name a beneficiary, and then how that beneficiary inherits that account depends on their relationship to you. So spouses can do what they call treat as their own. So, if I left my IRA to my husband and something happened to me, then he could just literally take it on as his own IRA account. But now our kids, if we leave it to them and something happens to us, then they're taking on a beneficiary account, and beneficiary accounts have specific rules. The distributions to beneficiaries are going to depend on the type of account you leave them. So if it's a pre-tax account, they're going to pay taxes when they take distributions. If it's a qualified Roth IRA, so those designations we talked about to make it tax-free, then it's tax-free to your heirs.
Are siblings the same as children from that regard?
Yes. So the only one that gets the exception and treat as their own is going to be spouses.
Okay.
Everybody else would inherit it as a beneficiary IRA, as that designation.
Okay.
Any other questions?
I feel like I have so many questions, but I'm definitely going to schedule another one-on-one with you because like going through the slides, I understand the concepts clearly, but then looking at my specific situation, I just want to make sure I'm maximizing all opportunities that's available to me to make some of the funds that I have liquid for PML deals.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. I'd love to sit down with you guys. And like I said, sometimes questions are a little more personal when it comes to retirement accounts.
Right,
We're talking about retirement money and things like that. So I'm happy to schedule, if anybody can reach out to me, I'm happy to have a conversation. There's no commitment there. We have these conversations every day at Advana.
And when I send out the thank you email for joining, I'll make sure your contact info is in there. That way, if there are questions that people want to ask that they don't want to ask, for the group, they're able to contact you and get the information that they need.
Okay.
I definitely have a million, mainly because, again, I want to strategize and make sure self-directed IRA versus solo 401k, like which one should I use? I'm also juggling in the option of using whole life insurance, which I'm learning about, being able to pull from those contributions. So I just need to mesh all the things together and see what I have available to me for a few projects that I'm looking to private money lend for.
Yeah, absolutely.
Mariam, Portia, Terry, you guys have any questions? We still have 8 minutes.
I do not. I jumped on late, so I missed the most of the beginning of it. So I absolutely am very unaware. I only caught the last half of it.
When I send the email, I'll send out the link once the video is edited and it's posted to YouTube. I'll send you the link so you can kind of review everything that you missed. And then also you'll have Larissa's contact information. So you'll be able to get in touch with her if you do have questions and need help with figuring out your own situation regarding the IRA or the 401k.
Yes, thank you. I appreciate it.
No problem.
Yeah, I'm good, Fire. Excellent information.
Yeah, this was
Wow.
really, really helpful and again, timely for me. As I said, when we met, I was still in the master class for private money lending. So still trying to learn like the foundation and the basics and make sure I'm not skipping steps and dotting on my I's, crossing on my T's. So doing this in the beginning stages and having more access to the funds that are sitting in other accounts is going to be super helpful for me to fund some preliminary PML deals for me. So yeah, it's been really good information.
Yeah. I definitely learned more. Like even though I did it right. I've done a self-directed IRA. I definitely learned some different things. So I appreciate it. This was very informative. That
Yeah,
wraps up
absolutely.
episode 17, huh? Unless we have more to add. Do we?
Yeah, we can give you guys 6 whole minutes back of your life. I'm sure you're going to do amazing things with 6 minutes.
Yes.
But thank you so much for joining us. Thank you, Larissa. You have been a wealth of knowledge regarding the self-directed IRA as well as the solo 401k, which I know was just kind of thrown at you a little bit. But again, you guys will get a thank you email. You'll have a link to the recording for this. You'll also have contact information for myself and Brianna, as well as for Larissa. Feel free to reach out to her. You don't have to like go through us to reach to her. Reach out to her, get what you need, do what you need to do. And I hope it was super helpful for everyone.
Thank you
I
so much,
agree.
guys, for having me. I really appreciate it.
Thank you so much for coming. And you
Thank
said you have another webinar coming up soon?
I do. I have a webinar on master leasing on Tuesday, so that's going to be really exciting. I'm excited.
Okay.
I have a guest speaking with me on that one, so that's going to be great. But like I said, I mentioned a few of the webinars, so like unrelated business income tax. I have one. I did a presentation for a group today on solo 401ks, but I did just do a recording of one too. So if anybody has any questions on some specific types of investments or specific types of accounts, it's possible it's in our library. I mean, we've been recording them for years now, so I'm happy to send those out too.
Oh, nice. Perfect. I'll look at that and then I'll stay in touch with you so that when you're having additional webinars, I can also kind of throw those out there on my pages as well and get just like a bit more visibility for you.
Oh, thank you. I appreciate that.
No problem. All right, guys, if there's nothing else, thank you so much for joining us. Hopefully we will see you next month. My goal for next month, Brianna and I spoke about, is to get a guy on to talk about using whole life insurance policies. And I think they are specific policies, are not like all in the same, but the ability to use those and contributions you've made to those to pull out funds to invest your real estate ventures. So I'll keep you guys posted. And Brianna, you have anything to close out?
No, that's it. Just hope to see you all next month. Thank you so much, Larissa. Appreciate everybody's time.
Thank you so much. Everybody have a good night.